Today, we are once again observing Shavuot, which is the fourth of the 7 Moedim. It is also a day on which the religious of Israel recognize that Yahweh came down on Mount Horeb and gave the people the first 10 words of Torah. We also know from Acts chapter 1 verses 6 through 8, when Yeshua was about to depart from the Mount of Olives to sit at the right hand of his Father, his Talmudim asked him one last question. Master, are you at this time going to restore self-rule to Israel? He answered, you don't need to know the dates nor the times. The Father has kept these under his own authority. But you will receive power when the Ruach HaKodesh comes upon you, and you will be my witnesses, both in Yerushalayim, Yehuda, Shomron, and to the ends of the earth. They were to receive the power just 10 days after, at Shavuot 30 CE. Then, in Acts chapter 2, we are told that all occurred on that special day of Shavuot. So began the development of the first century Messianic community, which spread throughout the Roman diaspora over the next 40 years, until the Second Temple was destroyed, and most of the people of Yehuda were either killed or displaced throughout the diaspora for most of the next 1900 years. That is why we join together today to remember how the new covenant that Yeshua ratified through his sacrificial death was written not on tablets of stone, but instead on the hearts of all those who were called by the Ruach HaKodesh to become Talmudim of Yeshua. That outpouring that the Ruach at Shavuot 30 was for the benefit of all who were present in the temple court on that day. Most present that day had been in Yerushalayim when Yeshua was actually put on trial before Pilate, and many among the crowd at Shavuot were also part of the crowd who shouted out, "Kill him!" Then, on Shavuot, they were seeing with their own eyes how the Ruach was spreading the message of salvation in all their own languages through the mouth of Yeshua's own 11 chosen emissaries. It was not the first time, of course, that the Ruach HaKodesh had manifested itself among the emissaries, because during the Sunday evening following his resurrection, Yeshua appeared in the upper room, where in Yochanan, John, chapter 20, verses 19 through 23, we are told, Shalom Aleichem. Having greeted them, he showed them his hands at his side. The Talmudim were overjoyed to see their master. Shalom Aleichem, he repeated. Just as the Father has sent me, I myself am sending you. Having said that, he breathed on them and said to them, receive the Ruach HaKodesh, and if you forgive someone his sins, their sins will be forgiven. If you then hold them, they are to be held. By his actions, breathing upon them, he passed on some of his power through the Ruach HaKodesh. In the same way, those who put their trust in the emissaries also received the same gift from Yahweh. As Acts 2 says, at Shavuot, 3,000 people were added to that fledgling Messianic community. It appears to have happened because after receiving the 10 words at Mount Horeb, the people built the golden calf, and 3,000 died in the plague which followed. So here, in 30 CE, 3,000 more were restored back to the family of God. Even now, in the 21st century, as Talmudim of Yeshua, we deem it a privilege to remember yet again that important Shavuot of 30 CE, which began the first century Messianic community. As I said last week, following the Six-Day War of 1967, things changed dramatically for both Israel and the modern Messianic community. as we looked at Yehuda, or Judah, ben Samuel, he had been given a vision that over a period of 10 yovels, or 50-year cycles, which would come in continuous succession. So we would do well to reflect on that vision as it applies during the period between 1517 and 2017. As Yehuda ben Samuel was told, the Ottoman Empire would rule over Jerusalem for 8 yovels, or 400 years, from 1517 to 1917. Then the British Empire and the Jordanian Wak would dominate over Jerusalem between 1917 and 1967. Then the city of Jerusalem, and more particularly the Temple Mount, would pass back into the hands of the modern state of Israel. Then comes the last yovel of Yehuda's vision, which took place between 1967 and 2017. That was the end of the 10 yovels that Yehuda had been shown. Yet because of another Shemitah, or 7-year cycle, has now passed since the end of his visionary period in 2017, we still need to call on the Ruach HaKodesh for guidance in helping us understand scripturally what is happening to Israel today, particularly as we wait for the upward call from Yeshua. We also need to reflect constantly on the 11 emissaries and what they asked Yeshua when he was about to depart. As they said, "Master, are you going at this time to restore self-rule to Israel? You don't need to know the dates nor the times the Father has set under his own authority. For you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and all the way through to the ends of the earth." Therefore, it's also beholden upon us to heed the Master's words and continue being his witnesses to the world as we wait for his return. 2 further questions were also asked of Yeshua by his Talmudim when he was departing from the temple courts for the last time on the afternoon of the 12th of Aviv in 30 CE. Some of his Talmudim drew attention to the beauty of the stonework and the memorial decorations of the temple. However, forgetting that same temple had been built by Yeshua's arch-enemy, Herod the Great. So Yeshua responded by saying in Luke chapter 21 verse 6, "The time is coming when you will see here that what you see here will be totally destroyed. Not a single stone will be left standing." Later that same afternoon, in Matthew chapter 24 verse 3, when they were sitting on the Mount of Olives, his Talmudim came to him again privately. "Tell us," they said, "when are these things going to happen? And what will be the sign that you are coming and the Olam Hazah, that is the present age, is ending?" In response to this double-barreled question, Yeshua gave a detailed description of what they could expect in the future. However, the way the narrative of Matthew chapter 24 has been presented suggests that Yeshua answered the question in a rather random manner. So to help us see a clear significance of his answer to both parts of the question, we need to rearrange the verse order in the middle of that chapter. In that way, we can see the answer that he gave to the 2 portions of that one question. So beginning with the first part of the question, when will these things happen? We need to leap forward to verses 15 and 16, where Yeshua said, "When you see the abomination causing desolation, spoken about through the prophet Daniel, standing in a holy place, it will be the time when that those in Yehuda are to escape to the hills." So what was the abomination that Yeshua was actually speaking about? Let's turn to Daniel. The answer is found in Daniel chapter 12 verse 11, where the words were given to Daniel in a vision about the future destruction of the temple. As Daniel says in verse 11, from the time of the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there will be 1290 days. So putting those words into context with what occurred in the first century, we see, according to Josephus, that the rebellion began in Caesarea in 66 CE, with a Greek merchant sacrificing birds in front of the local synagogue. Because the Roman procurator refused to stop this anti-Semitic behaviour, the Zealots forced the Kohanim to cease all daily prayers and sacrifices being offered in the temple on behalf of the Roman emperor. Hence, the regular burnt offering ceased, as Daniel had foretold. In response, the procurator reacted by sending troops to storm the temple treasury, removing 17 talents of gold and silver, claiming the money to be that offered to the emperor. So in February 67 CE, the count of 1290 days began and continued right through until the Roman troops under Titus overwhelmed the defenders and set fire to the temple, which it is said that it had occurred on Tisha B'Av, or the 30th of August 70 CE. So returning to Mattiyahu, Yeshua continues his discourse in chapter 24 verses 16 through 20 by warning his Talmudim to escape to the hills and not to turn back for any reason when they see the Roman troops advancing towards Jerusalem. Then he concluded his answer to the first part of that question, saying, "Pray that you do not have to escape in winter or on the Shabbat." Daniel's narrative continues in chapter 12, verse 12, where he says, "How blessed will be anyone who waits and arrives at 1335 days." Those words, again, are reflected by what Yeshua said in Mattiyahu 24:21, where he said, "For there will be trouble then, worse than there has been ever since, from the beginning of the world until now, and there will be nothing like it again." The period saw many thousands of people of Yehuda either killed by the sword or taken captive as slaves and displaced into the exile. However, some of the zealots who had been responsible for starting this rebellion escaped to Masada, where they held out until the Romans finally sieged the mountaintop of the stronghold, only to find that the rebels had ended their own lives in a suicide pact. That brought the first Jewish revolt to an end. So Yeshua ended his discourse in verse 22. "Indeed, if the length of time had not been limited, no one would have survived, but for the sake of those who have been chosen, the length of that time was limited." So who are those chosen ones for whom the time was limited? They are the ones who had heeded the words of Yeshua when he gave an answer to the first part of the question. They were the ones who fled to the hills when the Romans started approaching Jerusalem. Many of those escapees had been his Talmudim 40 years earlier when they asked those questions. They were the same ones who had been present at Shavuot 30 CE and had received the promised blessing of the Ruach HaKodesh. Remember when it came down as tongues of fire in Acts chapter 2. So when it came about 40 years later, they realized they had to flee from the city because the Ruach brought back to their minds the words of Yeshua and what he had spoken so long before. His Talmudim knew that they had to escape in haste before the siege of Jerusalem hemmed them in on all sides. They were the Messianic faithful who fled to Pila, east of the Yarden River, until 74 CE, when the war was finally over. So the latter words of Daniel were completely fulfilled. The same principle applies now in the 21st century. As Talmudim of Yeshua, we also need to listen intently to the words of Torah, the prophets, and Yeshua. Only by listening to those three will the Ruach be able to warn us what to expect in the near future. So, when the words of Matthew chapter 24 verse 31 happen, we will know what to expect. He said, he will send out his angels with the great shofar, and they will gather together all his chosen people from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. Will we be ready when that great shofar sounds? Will we recognize its sound and be ready to meet Yeshua in the air and be part of that first resurrection spoken about in Revelation chapter 20 verse 6, where Yochanan told us, "Blessed and holy is anyone who has part in that first resurrection. Over him the second death has no authority." On the contrary, they will be Kohanim for God and the Messiah, and they will rule with him for 1,000 years. Returning once again to Matthew chapter 24, we see in verses 4 through 12 how Yeshua answers the second part of the question asked by his Talmudim. There they said, "What will be the sign of your coming and the end of the Olam Hazeh, the present age?" He responded there by saying to them that there would be many false messiahs. There would be wars in many places, many famines, earthquakes. These things would happen all over the world. He also warned them that many would be arrested, punished, some even put to death, all of which would be done because they were hated by the world on account of their witness for Yeshua. False prophets would also abound and mislead many. As a result, the love of many would grow cold. All those things had to occur at various times have occurred throughout the last 2 millennia. But because most people have distanced themselves from the Torah, the prophets, and the words of Yeshua in favor of the doctrines and teachings of men, many will not recognize the sound of that great shofar. Having shared with his Talmudim what would happen in the world between his departure and his return, Yeshua concluded his answer to the second part of the question in an upbuilding statement. First, in verse 13, whoever holds on till the end will be delivered. Then, that verse, he also shows that all who are prepared to listen will need to endure right through to the end of this age, whether that be the end of our own personal life or until the call of the great shofar and the upward call. Whichever comes first, we still have to endure. Secondly, in verse 14, the good news about the kingdom will be announced throughout all the world as a witness to all the goyim, and then the end will come. So as we see, while the churches of Christendom have spread their message of supersessionism throughout the world, throughout the last 1900 years, between the period of 70 to 1967 CE, there still remains a time when the good news about the kingdom will be announced, as expressed by Yeshua himself. However, it will only occur during his 1,000-year reign of restoration. Only then will his message be announced to all the goyim or Gentiles before the end comes. So if all the goyim are to hear that good news, then all who have fallen asleep in death during the history of the period of mankind's development must be raised from death in the same way as Yeshua raised Lazarus. That will be the resurrection of the greater part of humanity into the 1,000-year age of restoration here on planet Earth. I will speak more about that in future Tefars. Then after all the Goyim have heard Yeshua's true message, then the end will come, which will of course be the great white throne judgment, as foretold in Revelation chapter 20 verses 7 through 15, with all who are left over, who have access to the tree of life, will be finally brought into one family, the family of God. So what we have seen by considering Matthew chapter 24 verses 4 through 14 must all occur before that final judgment. Only then will Yeshua hand everything back to his Father, just as Shavuot, Paul, said in 1 Corinthians 15 verse 28. Now when everything has been subjected to the Son, then he will subject himself to God, who subjected everything to him, so that God may be everything in everyone. So when Yeshua spoke to his Talmudim, who were asking that question, or those two, that double-barrel question, none of them had any idea how long the period would be between his departure and his return. Even his 12 emissaries were among those Talmudim who all thought that Yeshua was going to return within their lifetime. They had no concept of the fact that he was saying that he was going to be away. And this whole thing, from his message then right through to the final judgment, will be spread over a period of 3,000 plus years. All things then will finally be brought to fruition. So in conclusion, what have we gleaned from what we've been considering? For the most part, most people that were present in the temple courts on the day of Shavuot, 30 CE, it was just yet another pilgrim festival that was celebrated as normal. No one knew that in the midst there were 11 men who already had received the promised Ruach HaKodesh. Then suddenly tongues of fire descended and alighted upon those 11 men. As we read in Acts chapter 2, the 3,000 people were actually added upon hearing the message being spoken by those emissaries in their own languages about the reality of what had been done to Yeshua just 2 months earlier. It readily struck home, because they were totally overwhelmed with the guilt of the fact that they had been part of the crowd who'd actually called for the death of Yeshua. Those 3,000, realizing the guilt, became totally remorseful and begged for mercy from God, having acknowledged that their guilt, because of their guilt, they became the first 3,000 who were the foundation of the Messianic community, which has been developing over the last 2,000 years, and have become the ones who are called and chosen, and the ones who will be part of that upward call when Yeshua returns. Most of those 3,000 returned to their home countries, bearing witness to the good news about Yeshua as they were guided by the Ruach. Then, just 40 years later, any that had remained in Jerusalem were guided by the Ruach to flee for their lives to the hills, to the hill country around Pila, to avoid the destruction of Jerusalem. The destruction of Jerusalem totally transformed the lives of the greater part of the people of Yehuda and brought an end to the sojourn in Eretz Israel. Those lives were spared. Those whose lives were spared had to rebuild their society, a Jewish society in various parts of the known world. And it was not until 1967 that Jerusalem, and more particularly the Temple Mount, was actually returned to the control of the people of the modern state of Israel. But even then, they were still not ready to acknowledge the truth about Yeshua. However, the miraculous Six-Day War of 1967 impacted upon the whole religious world in many and varying ways, as it saw a steady decline in the Christian nations and a rapid increase or rapid rise in the Islamic world as being the dominating force. Even today, 57 years later, the world is in even more rapid decline on the political, the military, the social and environmental fronts. No nation knows the way out or the way forward. So again, that world backdrop is even more reason why that we need to listen to that quiet, small voice of the Ruach HaKodesh, who speaks to all who are prepared to listen. His message is the same message that was given to those 3,000 men who stood in the temple court in Shavuot 30 CE. Only they, along with the 11 emissaries, saw and heard the presence of the Ruach HaKodesh, and only they were ready to acknowledge the profound changes that were occurring all around them. So also, we come together as a small group of like-minded people, and people like ourselves all around the world come together on this day of Shavuot, and we must remember to listen to the words of our Master Yeshua through the Ruach HaKodesh. Like those who saw the advance of the armies of Rome heading toward Jerusalem in 70 CE, heeded the message of the Ruach to escape to the hills. In a similar way, we need to listen for that great shofar and the call to meet Yeshua, our Master, in the air. Hag Sameach, Shalom.